I stopped right outside the private dining room and pressed my back to the cold marble wall. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just heard Daniel laugh, that quiet, familiar chuckle of his, and instinctively stepped closer, expecting to surprise him with a kiss. But then I heard her voice, sharp, measured, unmistakably his mother's. "Daniel, stop being so spineless. You're getting married. That apartment of hers? It's time she gave it up for the family." My blood froze. I didn't move. I couldn't. Inside that room, the man I loved and the woman who would soon be my mother-in-law were discussing my apartment, my life, as if I weren't real. As if I were just a line item in a spreadsheet they were trying to optimize. I felt my nails dig into the fabric of my clutch, and a low ringing started in my ears. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Earlier that evening, I had been nervously fixing my lipstick in the rearview mirror of my car, parked just outside Aubergine, the fanciest restaurant in Lincoln Park and the place Daniel picked for our engagement dinner. I looked like a woman in love. Emerald green dress, soft waves in my hair, my favorite silver earrings. I even wore that shade of lipstick Daniel once said made my eyes look like thunderclouds. My stomach fluttered as I checked the time. 6:03 p.m. Wait. I frowned. The reservation was at 7. How did I get the time so wrong? I shook my head, half laughing at myself. I had been so caught up with details, choosing the perfect dress, picking the right gift for his mother, that I'd somehow shown up a full hour early. I spotted Daniel's silver sedan already parked outside. That was odd. He was punctual but never early. Maybe he wanted to make sure everything was perfect, too. My heart swelled at the thought. Inside, the hostess greeted me with a practiced smile. "Good evening. May I help you?" "Yes. Hartman, reservation for 7, I said, standing taller than I felt. She scanned her tablet. "Yes, Ms. Hartman. The reservation is set, but your party hasn't arrived yet. Would you like to wait at the bar?" I almost said yes, but then I heard his laugh. The soft, slightly breathy one I knew so well. It came from the side hallway, near the smaller private rooms. "Oh, never mind," I told the hostess. "I see them." I followed the sound, curious and smiling, until I heard Susan Carter's voice cut through like a scalpel. "You're not a child anymore, Daniel. You've lived in that shoebox long enough. Sophie's apartment is bigger. She bought it with her own money, sure, but what's hers will be yours soon enough. Marriage is about sacrifice." Daniel responded, but his voice was small, hesitant. "Mom, it's not that simple. Sophie worked hard for that place." "Well, I worked hard raising you," she snapped. "And now it's time I get to live in comfort. You think it's fair I'm still in that drafty little duplex in Cicero while your fiancé sips coffee in a luxury downtown condo?" I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I pressed my hand over my heart, as if I could steady it. My lungs were tight. The hallway spun, just slightly. I backed away before they saw me, my heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. I murmured something unintelligible to the hostess as I passed, and stumbled out into the street, letting the cold autumn air slap me awake. Rain began to fall, thin and icy, and I stood beneath the awning, staring blankly at the silver sedan, Daniel's car, the one he'd driven me in so many times, with music playing softly and his hand resting gently over mine. That same car had brought him here early to scheme with his mother about how to take away the one thing in my life I had built with my own hands. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. 3 years. That apartment had cost me 3 years of skipped vacations, second jobs, and eating dollar noodles. 3 years of refusing to ask my parents for help, of learning how to patch drywall and refinish wood floors. 3 years of telling myself I could do it alone, that I was worth investing in, and now I was a problem to be solved. I looked at my phone. Daniel had called twice. I didn't answer. I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth. Rage? Tears? Or worse, silence that screamed. Instead, I sat there, watching the raindrops race each other across the windshield, letting the cold seep in through the seams of my dress. I felt stupid, naive, not just for loving Daniel, but for believing, truly believing that we were equals, that he saw me as a partner, not a resource to be repurposed for his mother's comfort. Was he really going to let her move in? Were they really expecting me to sell my apartment, leave downtown, and live in some suburban house with the two of them under one roof? I didn't know what hurt more, Susan's entitlement or Daniel's silence. I closed my eyes and leaned back. The image of Daniel smiling at me across a restaurant table blurred and twisted in my mind. And for the first time since he proposed, I wondered if I'd been in love with a version of him that never actually existed. I started the engine. I didn't go home. Not yet. I just drove through streets glazed with rain, beneath blinking yellow lights, through neighborhoods that didn't know me and never asked anything of me. Somewhere between Lakeshore Drive and the edge of River North, I finally turned the wheel toward home, back to the apartment that was mine, still mine for now. By the time I stepped inside my apartment, my soaked heels had begun to blister, and my dress clung to my legs like wet seaweed. I left them both by the door. The moment I heard it click shut behind me, something inside me unclenched, like the entire world could finally stop pressing against my ribs. This place, these walls, this light, this silence had cost me everything, and I would not let it go. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, lit only by the warm under-cabinet lights that I had installed myself. The floor still bore the faint scars of the first time I tried to lay tile, crooked and unsure. The bookshelf sagged slightly where I had drilled the anchors, too close to the edge. Every imperfection in this space was mine, proof of effort, of stubbornness, of independence. I sat down at the dining table, staring at the empty chair across from me. That was where Daniel usually sat on Sunday mornings, scrolling through his phone while I made pancakes. The last time he was here, he talked about building a future, one that felt rooted in us. Not this, not some plan hatched between him and his mother behind my back. I pressed my fingers into my temples. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe Susan was just speculating. Maybe Daniel would come to his senses. I wanted to believe that so badly it hurt, but my gut told me otherwise. I barely slept that night. The city outside kept breathing, sirens, buses, the occasional honk. But my apartment remained a pocket of stillness, a pocket I had carved out of chaos, and now they wanted to take it from me. The next morning, I stood by the window with a cup of bitter coffee, watching the mist rise off the pavement 5 stories below. I should have called Daniel, asked for an explanation, but I wasn't ready for his voice or for the way it might try to smooth things over. Instead, I called Susan. "Hi, Susan," I said, trying to make my tone light like I wasn't shaking inside. "I wanted to stop by and see you today. I figured we should get to know each other better. After all, we'll be family soon." She sounded surprised, but pleased. "Well, aren't you sweet?" "Of course, dear. Come by around noon. I'll put on some tea." I got ready slowly, chose a soft, neutral sweater and a kneeling skirt. Light makeup, low heels, nothing that screamed confrontation. I picked up a bouquet of daisies and a box of chocolates on the way. I had a role to play. Susan lived in a narrow 2-bedroom duplex in Cicero. The siding was chipped, the porch creaked, and the hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and nostalgia. When she opened the door, she was already wearing lipstick and a silky robe that tried too hard to look effortless. "Sophie, come in, come in. You look lovely." "Thanks, Susan. These are for you," I said, handing her the flowers and chocolates. "Oh my, you didn't have to," she cooed. "Come sit. I've got Earl Grey steeping." The living room was a time capsule. Plastic-covered furniture, framed embroidery on the walls, dusty porcelain figurines lined up on the shelf. Pictures of Daniel at every age. Daniel as a baby, Daniel at graduation, Daniel in a wrinkled prom tuxedo. No father in sight. I sat carefully on the edge of the couch, Susan brought over a tray with mismatched china cups and sat across from me, smoothing her robe. I have to say, I didn't expect you to reach out like this. It's mature, she said, eyeing me with thinly veiled curiosity. I just think it's important, I replied. We should understand what we're all stepping into. Susan smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Exactly what I've been saying. We danced around it for a while. She asked about my parents. I asked about her back pain. We both smiled too much. Then finally she leaned in. You know, Sophie, I was thinking about your place, she said, sipping her tea. It's lovely, but small. Not really built for a family. I let that hang in the air. You're probably right, I said. It's a one-bedroom. Cozy but tight. She nodded vigorously. And mine's too far out for Daniel's job. Not ideal. But if we sold both places, we could get a spacious condo. 3 bedrooms. Plenty of room. One for you too. One for me. Maybe even a nursery eventually. The words slid out of her mouth, so easily it was terrifying, as if she'd rehearsed them. I see, I said, keeping my voice steady. You've looked at listings? Oh yes. There's a beautiful one just off Pulaski. Big kitchen. Good schools nearby. I didn't ask who'd live where. I already knew. And Daniel? I asked, how does he feel about this? She hesitated for half a beat. We haven't fully discussed it yet, but he's a smart boy. He knows what's best for the family. Best for the family, not best for me. The rest of the visit blurred together. She showed me an album of Daniel's baby photos, talked about casserole recipes, made veiled jabs at my modern lifestyle. I nodded and smiled and kept my hand still in my lap. But inside, something was coiling tight. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't take off my coat. I sat on the couch, still holding my purse in my lap. This wasn't just about a house. It was about control. It was about erasing everything I'd worked for and wrapping it in ribbon labeled family. Daniel called that night. How was it with Mom? He asked, casual but cautious. It was informative, I said. She told me about the new condo plan. Oh, he said. Silence. Yeah, she mentioned it. She didn't just mention it, Daniel. She had listings, prices, blueprints. He sighed. She's just excited. She gets carried away. It doesn't mean, do you support it? I asked. More silence. I think it could work, he said finally. It would make her happy. And you'd get a bigger place. We'd all be together. We'd all be together. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night again. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the soft patterns of shadows that danced across the room as car lights passed outside. There was something quietly terrifying about how quickly love could shift into something else, something calculating. I kept hearing Susan's voice. 3 bedrooms. One for you. One for us. One for the baby. And Daniel's voice, softer but worse in its own way. We'd all be together. By morning, I knew what I had to do. If I confronted them emotionally, I'd lose. They'd twist it into guilt, into shame, into responsibility. No, this had to be done with control, with clarity. So I called Daniel and invited him and his mother over for dinner. My voice was light, almost cheerful. I told him I wanted to make up for missing the engagement dinner, that I'd cook something special, that we'd talk about the future. He sounded surprised, relieved. She'll be thrilled, he said. She felt bad about the other night. I didn't answer that. I was already planning the menu. I cleaned my apartment like I was preparing for battle, polished the silverware, dusted the baseboards, lit candles I'd been saving for some other occasion. Something about making the place perfect gave me the illusion of control. Then I cooked. Not just food, an entire performance. Salmon in parchment, asparagus with lemon zest, homemade lemon tart for dessert. I set the table with my best china, real cloth napkins, and a small bouquet of hydrangeas in the center. The apartment smelled like warm citrus and thyme. It looked like a Pinterest board, And on the counter, just out of sight, I placed the small black voice recorder I used for meetings at work. At exactly 7, the buzzer rang. When I opened the door, Daniel was holding a bouquet of roses. Susan had a box of chocolates. Both wore overly bright smiles that didn't quite match their eyes. "Wow," Susan said, looking around. "You've really made this place shine." "Thanks," I replied, taking their coats. "Please sit." We started with small talk. Susan raved about the asparagus. Daniel complimented the wine. We laughed politely. For a while, everything felt oddly normal, like nothing had ever been said, like no plans had been made in secret. And then, somewhere between the salmon and dessert, Susan leaned forward and said, "I stopped by that condo again today. The one off Pulaski? It's still on the market." Daniel looked down at his plate. I folded my napkin slowly. "That's great," I said. "But before we talk about condos, I'd like to play you both something." Susan blinked. "What do you mean?" I stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, and picked up the recorder. Then I pressed play. Susan's voice filled the apartment, crisp and clear. She bought it with her own money, sure. But what's hers will be yours soon enough. Marriage is about sacrifice. Daniel's reply, "It's not that simple. Sophie worked hard for that place." Susan again, "Well, I worked hard raising you." The room went silent. The only sound was the faint click of the recorder ending. When I looked up, Susan's face had gone pale. Daniel's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I was early. At the restaurant," I said. "I heard everything, and then I recorded the rest when I came back. I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining it." "Sophie," I held up a hand. "Don't. Please. Just let me say this once." I turned to Susan. "You weren't just dreaming out loud. You had a plan, a timeline. You even knew the realtor's name. You've been planning this for longer than I've even been engaged." She tried to speak. I didn't let her. "You see this apartment? I didn't inherit it. I didn't marry into it. I earned it. Every inch of this space is mine. From the creaky floorboard in the hallway to the paint chips I cried over when I couldn't afford a contractor." Daniel stood up. "Sophie, we just wanted to manipulate me into giving up my independence," I snapped. His shoulders slumped. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I asked, because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you planned to wear me down. Like you thought if your mom asked and you stayed silent, I'd eventually fold. Susan stood, too. "Don't be dramatic. We were just trying to build a future together." "No," I said. "You were trying to build a house with my bricks on your terms." I turned back to Daniel. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. He looked nothing like the man who once brought me coffee after my all-nighters. Nothing like the man who told me he admired my strength. "Let me ask you one thing," I said quietly. "If I said I wasn't going to sell, if I refused to move out of this apartment, would you still marry me?" He hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed again. I don't know." And that was all I needed to hear. I walked to the credenza near the window and pulled out a small white envelope. I handed it to him. He looked confused, then opened it. Inside was the engagement ring he hadn't even gotten the chance to give me properly. "Sophie, I think this belongs to you," I said. "It's a lovely ring, just not for me anymore." Susan gasped. "You're breaking off the engagement over this?" "I'm protecting what I built," I said. "And I'm choosing myself, for the first time in a long time." Daniel didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, holding the envelope like it had suddenly become heavier than his own conscience. They left a few minutes later. Susan didn't say goodbye. Daniel looked at me one last time, and for a moment I saw the man I fell in love with. But I also saw the man who would never be able to stand up to his mother. Not for me. Not for us. After they were gone, I sat at the table in silence. The candles flickered. The wine stayed untouched. And in the middle of my perfectly set table, the empty plates glistened under the soft kitchen light. It should have been a dinner to celebrate love. Instead, it became the moment I chose freedom. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Daniel. His voice sounded quiet, almost rehearsed, like someone trying to rewrite the script after the final scene had already played out. Sophie, I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean for it to come out this way. Can we just talk? I didn't call him back. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I needed air, perspective, space. So, I did what I always did when I couldn't breathe inside my own thoughts. I went walking. Grant Park was only a few blocks away. The leaves were just starting to crisp, littering the paths with gold and rust-colored confetti. I found a bench near the fountain and just sat, letting the breeze do what no words could. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel texting. Can we meet? Just the two of us? I want to understand what you're feeling. It was the first time he'd asked that. Not to fix, not to smooth, just to understand. So I said yes. We met that evening by the park gates. He looked tired, older somehow, not physically, but in the way people do when their illusions have started to crumble. Hey, he said gently. Hi. We walked for a bit, in silence at first. The city hummed quietly around us. Cars, laughter, the occasional bark of a dog. But between us, it was just the sound of shoes on gravel and the wind moving through the trees. I didn't know you were recording us, Daniel said after a while. I didn't plan to, I replied. But when I heard that conversation, something inside me broke. I needed proof. For myself. For when I started to doubt if I was overreacting. He nodded slowly. I didn't stop her. I know that. No, I said, you didn't. That's what scared me most. We stopped by a bench near the rose garden. I didn't sit. I turned to face him. Daniel, I need to ask you something. And I want you to be honest, even if the answer hurts. He looked up at me, expression cautious. If I hadn't said anything, if I'd just gone along with it, sold the apartment, moved out to wherever Susan wanted, would you have been okay with that? He hesitated, just long enough to answer the question before he opened his mouth. I think, yes. I would have told myself it was for the best. I nodded. And if I say I'll never agree to that, that I won't sell, won't move, won't live under someone else's rule in a home I paid for alone, what happens then? He sighed. Then we'd have to figure out another plan. No, I said, you'd try to convince me. Again and again. And maybe not today or next week. But eventually you'd resent me for not giving in. He shook his head. That's not fair. Isn't it? I whispered. Every time your mom hinted, you stayed quiet. Every time she made decisions for us, you let her. And when I finally said no, you didn't defend me. You just asked me to consider her feelings. She's my mom, Sophie. And I'm supposed to be your partner. He flinched. I didn't stop. I was willing to build a life with you, but I will not build a life for you. I will not erase my independence to make room for your mother's comfort. Daniel sat down on the bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. She raised me alone. She gave up everything. I just wanted to give her something back. And that's noble, I said. But you don't repay someone's sacrifice by asking someone else to sacrifice in their place. Silence again, a deep one this time, the kind that comes when both people realize they're standing on opposite sides of something that used to be shared. He looked up at me finally. What do you want, Sophie? I want someone who protects what matters to me as fiercely as I do, I said. I want a partner who sees my life as something sacred, not negotiable. I want a future where I don't have to beg to keep what's already mine. His eyes welled up just a little. You don't think I can be that person? I think if you were, I wouldn't have had to ask. That broke him. Not in some cinematic, falling to his knees kind of way, but in the quiet slump of a man who finally realizes he lost something real. He stood up, took a breath. So this is it. I nodded. I think it has to be. We didn't hug, didn't cry. We just stood there, two people who almost made it. And then he walked away, hands in his pockets, the wind catching the edge of his coat as he turned the corner. I sat on the bench alone for a long time, watching the sky fade into dusk. I felt raw, hollow, but also relieved. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground and didn't apologize for it. It took me a week to take the ring out of the drawer. I hadn't looked at it since the night I handed it back. I tucked it away in the velvet box it came in, slid it behind old receipts and expired coupons, like I could bury the memory of it under things that no longer mattered. But memories don't work that way. They don't stay buried. One morning, I found myself holding it again, just standing in my kitchen in an oversized sweater, sunlight pouring in across the tile. And suddenly there it was, that delicate white gold band, the solitaire diamond, simple, elegant, exactly my taste, or what Daniel believed was my taste. I turned it over in my fingers. It didn't sparkle the way it used to. Maybe it never had. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but there was a strange calm that came over me, a finality. This ring had never touched my skin long enough to mean anything. It wasn't part of a promise. It was part of a plan, a strategy, a soft-spoken negotiation that came with strings I hadn't seen until they began to tighten. I placed the ring back in the box. Then I picked up my phone and called the jeweler. The woman on the line recognized my name. "Of course, Ms. Hartman. We can assist with a return or consignment sale. Would you prefer to come in person?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, I think I'd like that." Later that afternoon, I walked down to the shop where Daniel had purchased the ring. It was tucked between a tailor and a florist on Michigan Avenue, a place we had passed many times together. I always loved the storefront, elegant, understated, with beveled glass that caught the sun in quiet ways. The associate, a woman named Miriam, greeted me gently. She had kind eyes and didn't ask unnecessary questions. I handed her the box, and she opened it with care, like it was something precious. I suppose it still was, just not to me. "We can list it on consignment," she said, "or offer you a direct buyout today." I chose the buyout. I didn't want it lingering somewhere behind a display case, waiting to be worn by someone else. I wanted it gone. As I walked back toward home, I felt lighter. Not joyful exactly, but released. A few days later, I took that money and did something I'd never done before. I booked a trip. Not a weekend getaway. Not something cheap or safe. A real trip. I rented a cottage in Vermont for a month, remote, near the woods, with a clawfoot tub and no TV. I needed space. I needed stillness. When I arrived, I left my phone in a drawer for 3 days. I read old books. I cooked slowly. I wrote pages of things I never planned to publish. One morning, I sat on the porch watching mist roll over the hills, and I realized something simple and profound. The absence of chaos feels like grief at first, but it's actually peace. I thought about Daniel sometimes. I wondered if he still lived in the same apartment, if Susan had moved in, if he ever looked at his phone and hesitated before deleting my number. But mostly I thought about myself, about how long I had spent bending, making room, compromising, smiling through things I should have screamed about, laughing off comments that chipped away at me in tiny, invisible ways. And I promised myself something: never again. Never again would I dilute my boundaries to make someone else comfortable. Never again would I accept silence in place of support. On my last night in Vermont, I wrote a letter I didn't send. "Dear Daniel, you were never cruel. That's what made it harder. Cruelty is easy to walk away from, but quiet dismissal, soft manipulation, careful pressure dressed up as love, that's harder to name and harder to fight. You didn't hurt me with words. You hurt me with silence, with the way you let your mother speak for both of you, with the way you expected me to give without being asked. You made me feel like I was too proud, too protective, too selfish. But all I wanted was to protect the life I had built, something no one had ever handed me. And in the end, I didn't walk away because I stopped loving you. I walked away because I finally started loving myself. I hope someday you understand that difference. Sophie, when I got home to Chicago, the city looked different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I didn't go looking for someone new. I didn't try to fill the silence. I let it live beside me. I started going back to the things I'd neglected. Painting again, joining a yoga class, calling my sister on Sunday mornings just to talk about nothing. One evening, I passed by a couple standing outside Aubergine. She was wearing a green dress. He was holding a velvet box. I didn't stop. I didn't stare. I just smiled gently and kept walking. Because my story didn't end at that restaurant. It didn't end in an apartment or a phone call or even on a park bench. It began when I stopped shrinking. When I took the ring I never wore and turned it into a door I could finally walk through alone but never lonely.